Welcome, everybody, here at NYU School of Law and virtually around the world and around the country, US and Canada. My name is Ike Nahem. I'm with the New York, New Jersey, Cuba-C Coalition and the International US-Cuba Normalization Conference Coalition. I'm here to call this meeting to order. And to begin a day's activities against the U.S. economic and political war against Cuba that coincides with our being able to host here in New York and New Jersey a strong delegation of sisters from Cuba that are here in the United States, in New York City, to attend the Commission for the Status of Women 68 2024 at the United Nations. So I first want to welcome our delegation that is here from Cuba, and which we will be meeting and hearing from them in the course of our activities today. We also have some dear friends that have traveled from the Cuban embassy in Washington, D.C., and are also with the Cuban mission to the United Nations here in New York City. These sisters and brothers, we want to tell them that what they already know, that you have many friends in the United States, in New York, that are diligently working to end the U.S. economic and political war against Cuba, that we brought together here and in the virtual program, many organizations and groups that are united around this goal. Now, before we get started, I want to take a moment to call attention to some sad developments for our movement. Over the past period, and just recently, a couple of days ago, we heard the very sad news of the passing of our dear sister Joan Gibbs, who many of you, I'm sure, know, a long-time fighter for every just cause, and especially the defense of revolutionary Cuba. Joan passed just a couple of days ago, and we're all very devastated by that. Joan, decade after decade, was a leading fighter, National Association of Conference of Black Lawyers, a fighter in every way, and she joins other dear comrades that have passed in the just recent period that many of you know, Sister Merle Ratner, Brother Ralph Pointer, and Sister Viola Plummer. So I would ask everybody to please stand, and we'll do a moment of silence for these exemplary fighters. Thank you. I want to give a couple of other quick thank yous to folks before we get started on the first session of our teach-in today, which is really dedicated to the struggle in the United States and Cuba. We're going to hear about the fight for women's rights, the advances that have been made in the past period, but the theme that we're trying to emphasize in the course of our activities today is that there's a big contradiction when we think of the work that we all do around Cuba right now. Never has the policy of the U.S. government, the policy of asphyxiation, of strangulation, it's not bombs dropping and that we're seeing like we see every day in Gaza, but we do see a policy that is having an impact, an accumulated impact in terms of causing stresses and difficulties and big problems in Cuba, and that is tightened. So on the one hand, we see that the policy has never been more isolated, more hated around the world. We see that in the votes in the United Nations. We see that in many ways. We see that in whenever we say that we can bring somebody to talk about Cuba, we get a great response wherever we go. So that's on the one hand. But on the other hand, the policy continues, despite the hatred of the world, despite the opposition of the world. And this is the contradiction that we're in. Recently, I attended with others a wonderful continent-wide meeting of solidarity with Cuba on the African continent. And one of the themes of that, and I think it's something that we should all take to ourselves in this next period, is we have to move from words to deeds. We have to move from not just showing eloquent words and denunciations of the U.S. policy, but we have to develop opposition to it that makes the price that Washington, that bipartisan Washington, not always remember that the policies that were deepened under Trump have continued and deepened further under Biden. So I just wanted to make that point. There's gonna be a lot of challenges for us. This is an election year. There's gonna be a lot of challenges to have our issue of fighting the blockade be visible in the discussions that will take place, to make our opposition to Cuba being on the state sponsors of terrorism list to be more vulnerable and central. Now, before we continue, I want to get a welcome from the wonderful young people here at the NYU School of Law that have really done the groundwork to get us these great facilities. So I'd like to welcome Brother Sean Connolly, who's with the National Lawyers Guild chapter here at NYU, and also a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation that helped us get this wonderful space. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Sean. I'm a law student here. I'm also, the National Lawyers Guild is sponsoring this event. Also, I'm a member of the Review of Law and Social Change, which is a progressive legal journal at this school. And yes, I'm a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which is a socialist party in this country that stands strongly with the Cuban people. I think the only thing I wanted to say first is I wanted to just thank everyone for being in this space together. I guess as a law student, I just wanted to say that it's a little laughable sometimes learning law in this country, because the United States government is breaking international law every day. And one of the ways it does that, of course, is through the blockade of Cuba, which is not only a moral crime, but goes against any basic conventions of international law and friendly international relations. So, I'm really honored to be here today with a group of people who are fighting for the rights of Cuba and the Cuban people. If you have any questions about anything logistical throughout the day, you can reach out to me. I'll be around. So I appreciate you all here being here.
Thank you so much, John. John is an example of where everywhere we go, we find that people are interested. They want to hear about Cuba. They don't support the U.S. policy. So this tells us what we have to do in the next period. So moving right along, I want to also thank our brother, I don't know if he's here yet, Cesar Sanchez, who does all our wonderful graphic work that I think people have seen. This is an example of it. So let me move on to now introduce our two co-chairs. Thank you, Cesar, for this first session where we have a great panel. It's two very strong sisters, fighters, solidarity activists. We have with us, first of all, a student at NYU, our dear sister, Tarisse Iriarte. Tarisse is an organizer with New York, New Jersey, Cuba-C Coalition. She's an independent curator and arts activist from Brooklyn, New York, with Afro-Caribbean roots in Cuba and Puerto Rico. She is known as T to all of us and is an activist in all of our work in her beloved communities. She's a proud Afro-Puerto Rican working diligently on the global liberation of her people across the diaspora through socially engaged art. T is also very active. I don't know how she finds the time because she's also a student here at NYU and all the work that she does, but she's very involved in liberating political prisoners in the United States, in closing Rikers Island, and is active in the struggle for Palestinian self-determination. So that's one of our co-chairs, T, who will be brought up. The other is our dear sister who, thank you, that traveled along with Sister Allison, who's here also helping out all the way from Vancouver, Canada, to be with us, stalwarts in the cross-border, as we call it, struggle against the blockade with the International US-Cuba Normalization Committee. And that is Tamara Hansen. She's the coordinator of Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba, is an organizer with the US-Cuba Normalization Conference Coalition, and the author of the book, 5 Decades of the Cuban Revolution, The Challenges of an Unwavering Leadership. So again, now I'm leaving finally, and I'm going to turn this over to Tamara and T. Thank you so much.
Welcome and good morning, everybody. Viva Cuba! Abajo el bloqueo! Welcome this morning to the Cuba Teach-In, where we're going to be speaking out against the criminal and unjust U.S. blockade on Cuba and demanding that Cuba be removed from the United States' so-called state sponsors of terrorism list. I wanted to take a moment to recognize that we are in New York City and gathered on the traditional and ancestral Lenape homelands. New York City is also the largest urban indigenous population in the United States. And I would like to invite everyone calling in from traditional and unceded indigenous territories on Zoom to join us to take a moment to think about our responsibilities, that as we talk about fighting for Cuba's self-determination, we also have the responsibility to stand with indigenous people as they fight for their rights to self-determination. This year marks over 6 decades of cruel and unjust U.S. blockade on Cuba, and these are the broadest and longest set of sanctions and punitive measures against a nation in contemporary history. While the blockade impacts many facets of Cuban life, from healthcare to education to infrastructure and beyond, Cuba continues to inspire the world with its free healthcare and education systems, as well as the nationally developed and internationally recognized COVID vaccine that was created. The US-Cuba Normalization Conference Coalition is honored to welcome and host all of you here today once again for this teach-in, where we will hear from many inspiring speakers, including delegates from the Cuban Women's Federation. Let's give them a warm welcome and applause. While the Biden administration continues to enforce the unjust blockade, despite election promises, to end the Trump-era tightening of this inhuman policy, we are continuing to organize and to unite. So we're so glad that you are here with us today, and we're looking forward to a day of a great program, starting with our first session. So I'm going to welcome T to the microphone to introduce us to our first session and our first speaker. Welcome, T.
Gracias. Hello, good morning and saludos. Today we have an excellent program to unite and raise our voices for Cuba. Our first session this morning is on the Cuban women's movement and ending the U.S. blockade on Cuba. It will feature 5 speakers, including 2 special guests from the Cuban Federation of Women. Our very first speaker will be Osmayda Hernandez, a member of the FMC Secretariat, the director of FMC International Relations, and a member of the Union of Public Employees. Let's welcome Osmayda.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning.
Encantada de poder estar aquí nuevamente
It's a pleasure to be here. Newly,
y poder compartir con ustedes las experiencias de la delegación cubana que participa en la 68 sesión de la Comisión de la Condición Jurídica y Social de la Mujer.
and it's a pleasure to be here in representation of the women, the Cuban women delegation in the 68 year of the succession in the United Nations.
En esta ocasión estaremos hablando de cuáles son los derechos que disfrutamos las cubanas en nuestro país.
And in this occasion, we're going to talk about the rights of how us Cuban women have.
Y yo creo que es importante decirles que gracias a los movimientos femeninos y feministas existentes en Cuba, incluso antes del triunfo revolucionario de enero del 59,
And we would like to highlight the triumph we have as Cuban women that has its roots in the feminist movement in connection with the triumph of the Cuban Revolution of January of 1959.
hicieron posible que Cuba fuera pionera en alcanzar derechos que hoy constituyen luchas de muchas mujeres en el mundo.
That it brought basically the stage, the focal point for a lot of feminist movements, not just in Cuba, but for women worldwide.
Solo para poner dos ejemplos. Desde el año 1934, las mujeres cubanas tuvieron derecho al voto. Y de igual manera, en el año 1936 tuvieron derecho a la interrupción del embarazo, es decir, el derecho al aborto.
Perdona, ¿me puede repita eso una vez más? Sí, perdón.
Solo para poner dos ejemplos, desde el año 1934, las mujeres cubanas tuvieron derecho al voto.
Okay, so to put two examples, the women of Cuba from 1934 had the right to vote.
Y en el año 1936 conquistaron el derecho al aborto.
And from 1936, Cuban women had the right to abortion.
Esos derechos fueron consagrados en la Constitución del año 1940.
And all of these rights were consolidated in the Constitution of 1940.
Lo que no significa que fueran derechos universales para todas las mujeres.
This didn't signify universal rights for all the women.
No fue hasta enero del 59, con el triunfo de la Revolución Socialista, que esos derechos fueran universales y gratuitos para todas las personas, especialmente para las mujeres cubanas.
It wasn't just until the triumph of the 1959 revolution where these rights, these women's rights, were universal for all women, and it was for free cost.
En palabras de nuestro comandante en jefe, Fidel Castro, el 1 de enero del año 1959, Fidel expresaba que si había un sector de la sociedad que debía ser redimido, era el sector de la mujer.
So, in the lovely words of our commander Fidel, he said from a speech after the triumph of the revolution in 1959, he said that a right that was very liberated, openly liberated, were for the women, Cuban women.
Porque habían sido las mujeres uno de los sectores más discriminados dentro de la sociedad.
Because it was the women that were very discriminated within society.
En fecha tan temprana como de agosto del año 1960,
Just like dates like August of 1960.
gracias a la voluntad política de nuestro gobierno y a nuestro líder indiscutible, Fidel Castro,
Thank you for due to the volunteer act of our commander Fidel Castro.
se constituye la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas,
It constitutes the Federation of Cuban Women,
una organización que unificó a todas las organizaciones femeninas y feministas que existían en nuestro país.
an organization that united all the feminist women and movements of our country in
Por lo
Cuba.
tanto, la federación fue la primera expresión de unidad de las mujeres cubanas.
The Federation was the first expression of the unification of Cuban women.
Y fue en su segundo congreso, donde en el segundo congreso de la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas, donde se aprueban las tesis para la igualdad.
It was in the second Congress for the Federation of Cuban Women where this thesis is put forth.
Decirles que en Cuba la Constitución de la República garantiza la igualdad efectiva de todas las personas.
To put into perspective that the Constitution henceforth guarantees the right of all the women of Cuba.
Y garantiza vivir y disfrutar de todos los derechos.
And to guaranteed that Cuban women are able to take advantage of the rights and the freedoms of the Constitution.
Y cuando hablamos de los derechos, nos referimos a los derechos en la economía, en la política, en la cultura, en todos los ámbitos de la sociedad.
When we talk about rights in the sectors of economic, political, and other cultural expressions in Cuban society.
En el año 1995 se hizo la cuarta y última conferencia mundial sobre la mujer.
And in 1995, it was the fourth Congress on women's rights.
Allí participó una amplia delegación cubana presidida por Vilma Espín, la eterna presidenta de la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas.
This was spearheaded by Vilma Espín, a very important Cuban revolutionary woman.
Y fue en el año 1997 cuando Cuba aprueba su Plan Nacional para el Logro de la Igualdad.
It was in 1997 where Cuba approves this right for equality.
Plan Nacional que fuera actualizado en el año 2021.
This was a national plan that was approved in 2001.
Luego de haberse hecho 3 evaluaciones durante esos años. Estamos hablando del año 97 hasta el año 2021.
So there was like 3 evaluation of this national plan, which was spoken about from the 90s all the way to 2021.
Cuando hablamos de actualización, nos referimos a estar a tono con las normas jurídicas, es decir, con la nueva Constitución de la República que se aprobara en el año 2019.
So when we talk about this actualization, we're talking about this actualization, which comes in the juristic sense, which are discussions that have been had since 2019.
Y nos referimos a que ese plan nacional se convirtió en el Programa Nacional para el Adelanto de las Mujeres.
We refer to this plan, to this national plan, as a way of furthering more the rights of women in
Este
Cuba.
Plan Nacional para el Adelanto de las Mujeres constituye la agenda del Estado cubano para el desarrollo de políticas y programas a favor de las mujeres.
This national plan is to forward the self-determination of women economically and politically.
Y de lo que se trata fundamentalmente es en no retroceder en todo lo alcanzado en materia de igualdad de género.
And this is, to henceforth not to roll back any gains made, material gains made for women or those of different gender types.
Entre las dimensiones más relevantes que han condicionado las transformaciones de las mujeres están el acceso universal y gratuito a la educación,
One of the main rights, transformative rights, is the right to education,
el acceso universal y gratuito a la salud,
the universal right to healthcare,
el derecho a un empleo digno,
the right to an employment, a dignified employment,
el derecho a la toma de decisiones
the right to take your own choices,
y el respeto y garantía a sus derechos sexuales y reproductivos.
and to respect one's sexual and reproductive rights.
Mujeres y hombres disfrutan el derecho de recibir igual salario por trabajo de igual valor.
So both women and men have the right to receive the same amount of pay, same amount of salary for the same type of labor.
De los ocupados en la economía cubana, en el sector estatal civil, las mujeres constituyen más del 45%.
In the areas of Cuban society, in the labor part of the state and civic, Cuban women are almost about 45% of the labor force.
De ellas, el 87,9% poseen escolaridad media superior o superior.
So there's an over percentage, like over 80% of these women that are part of the governmental labor force have a high degree of education in Cuban society or hold high titles.
En diferentes sectores constituyen la mayoría.
And in different sectors, they comprise the majority.
Por ejemplo, en el sector de la ciencia, la innovación y tecnología representan el 54%.
In the areas of science and technology, they represent over 4%.
Son las mujeres el 80% de los jueces y fiscales en Cuba.
Wow. Oh,
Oh, sí.
so yeah, there's over 80% of women are judges and attorneys in Cuba.
Son las mujeres el 67% de la fuerza técnico y profesional.
They're over 60% of women are in the areas of the professional and technology sectors.
Las mujeres trabajadoras, tanto del sector estatal como del sector no estatal, disfrutan de los mismos derechos consagrados en el Código de Trabajo y, por supuesto, también en nuestra Constitución.
Yes, the women that work in the state or non-state labor are guaranteed the same rights of the Constitution.
No voy a ampliar en lo referido a la licencia de maternidad y responsabilidad de las familias,
I will highlight the maternity responsibility within the families, the Cuban families,
porque una de nuestras compañeras posteriormente lo hará en el panel dedicado a las trabajadoras.
so I'm not going to talk about that because I'm going to pass that to my comrade that will speak about that in the panels of labor.
Las mujeres cubanas, les decía ahorita, disfrutan del derecho a la educación universal, gratuita y de calidad.
Yes, the Cuban women, like I said before, they have the guarantee to a dignified education free of charge.
Y existe paridad en todas las enseñanzas.
And it demonstrates itself and exists in all of its forms and variations.
El 63,3% de los graduados en las universidades cubanas son mujeres.
Over 63% of Cuban people that graduate universities are women.
El 68,9% de los graduados en las ciencias médicas son mujeres.
Over 68% of women graduate from medicine and health.
Y el 64% de los integrantes de las brigadas de colaboración médica son mujeres,
And over the medical brigades,
lo que constituye motivo de orgullo ciertamente para todas las cubanas.
and this is what I'm expressing is very prideful for
Las
Cuban women.
cubanas
that they-
tenemos el derecho a la toma de decisión.
And Cuban women have the right to take their own decisions. But also, I just wanted to translate that most of the medical brigades is over 64. It comprises of over 64% of Cuban women, which is a
De los
big.
gobernadores y vicegobernadores provinciales, las mujeres son el 53,3%.
So in the governmental and vice governmental municipal positions, there's over 53% of Cuban women.
Y con satisfacción decimos que Cuba ocupa el segundo lugar del mundo en presencia femenina en el Parlamento.
When we are so proud and satisfactory to say that Cuba is the second place in the world that has a lot of women participating in their parliament.
Más de 300 mujeres, nos referimos al 55,7%, son parlamentarias.
Over 63% of women are parliamentary.
De igual manera supera el 50% las mujeres que son miembros del Consejo de Estado de la República de Cuba.
And it's over 50% that are a part of the status work of the Republic of Cuba.
Y tenemos el orgullo de decir que nuestra secretaria general es miembro del Consejo de Estado de la República de Cuba.
And we are very proud that our Secretary General represents our Grand
Y
Republic of
como
Cuba.
dice ella con mucha humildad, está allí representando a todas las mujeres cubanas.
And like we said before, she is there representing all the women of Cuba.
Ahora, tengo que decir que aún en la situación compleja que vive hoy económicamente nuestro país,
Now I have to express, because of the complex problems that our country faces economically,
como consecuencia de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales que impone el bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero a Cuba,
due to the unilateral coercive measures known as a blockade that has affected Cuba,
y la inclusión de Cuba en una lista de países que supuestamente patrocinan el terrorismo,
and having Cuba included in this list that supposedly that supports terrorism.
Cuba cada año incrementa su presupuesto para los programas sociales.
And Cuba always invests in social programs.
Para 2024, el 63% de los gastos totales de su presupuesto se han destinado para sostener esas conquistas sociales de las cuales hablábamos.
And in 2024, most of the gains of Cuba, most of its investments has gone to social programs.
Más del 80% de las cubanas y los cubanos nacimos bajo el impacto del bloqueo.
And over 80% of us Cuban women and men, we are born with this impact of the blockade.
Por lo tanto, las mujeres cubanas sentimos como nadie la fuerza del impacto del bloqueo.
And this impact of the blockade affects mostly us Cuban women.
Porque nos afecta en la vida cotidiana,
It affects us in our daily lives. Thank you.
nos afecta en el logro y el desempeño de todas estas responsabilidades que tenemos las mujeres en la sociedad.
It affects us. How would you say? Repita eso una vez más, perdón.
Nos afecta también a las que somos profesionales y tenemos responsabilidades en todos los ámbitos de la
Oh,
sociedad.
sí, gracias. It affects us who are also professionals in society.
No hay un sector de la sociedad cubana que no sienta el impacto del bloqueo. No hay
There's-
una mujer cubana que no se levante todos los días sintiendo el impacto del bloqueo.
And there's not one sector of Cuban women, regardless of what area of labor, where we don't feel the impact of the blockade.
Es el bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero la mayor expresión de violencia directa que sufrimos las cubanas.
And this commercial, financial blockade is a violence towards us Cuban women.
Por lo tanto, las mujeres cubanas recientemente realizamos nuestro 11º Congreso.
Us Cuban women, we still move forward in our self-determination regardless of this blockade.
Los días 7 y 8 de marzo fue el magno evento.
In the days of March 7 and 8th, they completed the recent Congress.
Y fue una demostración de cuánto podemos y hacemos las cubanas para resistir y crear.
And that right there shows us Cuban women, our ability to resist and create.
Fue un espacio además para demostrar al gobierno cubano, a la máxima dirección de nuestro país, la confianza en nuestros líderes.
And that was a space to demonstrate to our Cuban government the confidence we have in our leaders, our women leaders.
Y de demostrar además que el bloqueo nunca nos va a rendir.
And to demonstrate that the blockade will never make us fold.
Y que las cubanas somos un ejército en la revolución.
And us Cuban women, we are an army of the revolution.
Abajo el bloqueo.
Down with the blockade. Abajo.
Muchas gracias, compañera Osmayda. Thank you so much to the compañera Osmayda for that excellent opening to this first session. I want to also thank you so much to Yamir Chabur for translation. And we also have some English to Spanish translation happening. So thank you to Martine Koppel for that. We're now going to our first online speaker, which will be Deb Goldman. Deb is the co-chair of US Women and Cuba Collaboration's Lesbian and Allies Project. And we're very honored to have Deb with us here this morning. It's just going to take us a moment to open that up for her to speak online.
Deb, can you go ahead and speak?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you turn on your video?
Okay. Shall I go ahead and start?
Yeah. Do you have a video today? Like yourself as a video?
Oh, I thought I had fixed it. You cannot start your video.
Try
Well,
again.
it says the host has stopped it, so,
Just try one more time.
okay. There we go. Hi. Well, I certainly wish I was there with y'all in New York. Thank you so much, Tamara and Allison and the others from the US-Cuba Normalization Teaching Committee for giving me the honor of speaking, especially with these esteemed sisters and friends from Cuba. Like I said, I wish I was there with you. I'm Deb Goldman, and I'm on the advisory committee of the U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration and co-chair along with Moon Vasquez of the Lesbians and Allies Project. First of all, I want to thank Osmayda for her amazing presentation, giving us a wonderful history of the FMC and the model for a progressive way forward in terms of women's advancement in all facets of society, like she said, economic, political, social. The U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration is very proud to have been working very closely with FMC and ICAP for over 20 years now, building strong relations, learning from them, supporting them, and strengthening our solidarity towards ending the inhumane U.S. blockade against the people of Cuba, especially, as Osmayda said, for women. So recently I had the privilege of spending a month in Cuba. It was both a wonderful and a worrying trip for me. I had the opportunity to meet and speak to many women who told me their stories about how the blockade has affected their lives, their families' lives, their work. And many of them agreed to be videotaped, but I only have time to show one here. This morning for me, this afternoon for you. I'm in Seattle. So can we show this video? This is lesbian activist Olympia Diaz Borges from Cienfuegos, who, like the other women I met, lives with this blockade every day. And for most of them, they have lived with a blockade for all of their lives. There we go.
Mi nombre es Olimpia Díaz Borges, soy cienfueguera cubana, tengo 56 años de edad. Mi trabajo es dedicarme a hacer activismo social de una forma voluntaria en ayuda y apoyo a todas estas campañas por la no violencia contra la mujer. Es importante que las personas tengan conocimiento de cuánto afecta el bloqueo a estas mujeres que vivimos de activismo, porque económicamente las ayudas, la alimentación, el problema de la transportación depende de que haya combustible. En mí, como persona, mi mamá vive lejos de mí, vive a más de 20 kilómetros y yo quisiera verla todos los días y me es difícil porque el combustible no está disponible para la transportación de que yo pueda ver semanalmente a mi mamá. Pero cuando voy al médico porque tengo un dolor, porque tengo afecciones por salud y necesito un medicamento, no están, porque la materia prima para confeccionar estos medicamentos está en otros países y el bloqueo hace difícil que entren a nuestro país. Ejemplo también está en que mi hija joven decidió emigrar porque no es problema político, sino problemas económicos. Ella necesita abrir su futuro, abrir sus estudios, abrir su vida, tener un bienestar, pero además desea, quiere ayudarnos a nosotros, a su familia, y eso es importante para ella. Y el bloqueo está haciendo que esto suceda. Otras cosas para el activismo también es difícil, porque la comunicación, el intercambio con las personas que nos colaboran en otros países se hace difícil por esta misma situación del bloqueo, que ellos ponen leyes que regulan los viajes, que le hace difícil que ellos puedan venir o nosotros podamos ir, intercambiar sobre estos intereses que tenemos. Y yo quisiera ver a mis amigas, yo quisiera compartir con mis amigas, y eso me es difícil porque no hay manera si hay bloqueo.
So that was Olympia, and the last thing she talked about was the lack of ability to communicate with her friends, with us. We have a great relationship with many of the social gay and lesbian networks in Cuba. Because of the blockade, they aren't allowed to use Zoom and other platforms, so she can't even watch this whole wonderful workshop on Cuba and ending the Cuban blockade, the US blockade against Cuba. And she also mentioned her daughter, who is now living in Florida, who went there for economic reasons, to try and make a better life, to try and help support her family. And she emphasized that her daughter left for economic reasons, not for political reasons. And this was a common theme that I heard from many of the women. She also mentioned the lack of fuel, which was, again, another common theme among the women I talked to. There's a snowball effect with the lack of fuel for things getting to where they need to be, repairing farm equipment. There's so many problems with the lack of fuel. And I also noticed when I was there, the long lines when there was fuel available, and also long lines for food staples. And not the least of the problems that the women talked about, and each one of them mentioned the lack of medicines and medical equipment. I just want to give a shout out to folks like the Global Health Partners and Cuba Solidarity Campaign for their efforts to raise money and send much needed medicines and medical equipment to Cuba. And many of us try and bring as much material aid as we can when we visit Cuba. And though I was impacted by all the stories that I listened to, there was one in particular that stood out for me. And this was another young woman from Cienfuegos. She is a health educator for the Department of the Prevention of Sexually Transmitted Infections and HIV. She reports that there is a shortage of condoms, birth control methods, and supplies needed for assisted reproductive services, such as IVF. So women, including LGBTQ communities especially, are often not receiving the reproductive and women's health care they need due to lack of resources brought on by this criminal blockade. So we know that Cuba has been on the forefront of supporting reproductive rights of women, including abortion on demand. We heard Osmayda tell us that 1965 is when abortion was decriminalized in Cuba. So it was really unfortunate for me to learn that the lack of resources causes adequate or inadequate reproductive health care for Cubans. Let's see here. So we also heard from Osmayda about the constitutional rights, and I'm sure we'll hear more about constitutional rights and the Families Code from Dr. Yamila Gonzalez Ferrer. But the Families Code is a very progressive and comprehensive and truly revolutionary law, most recently passed, or the most recent iteration passed in 2022, that protects the rights of women, children, LGBTQ communities, and many others. While meanwhile, here at home in the United States, the government is chipping away at our reproductive rights, as evidenced by the Dobbs decision in 2022 to overturn Roe v. Wade and make abortion illegal again in our country. And now, since that decision was made, not surprisingly, many states are chipping away at hard-fought LGBTQ rights. In 2022, lawmakers in the United States introduced more than 240 bills targeting LGBTQ people, particularly transgender children, threatening their health and rights. For example, lawmakers in Florida and Alabama enacted controversial laws limiting discussions of sexual orientation and gender identity in schools. You've probably heard of the Florida's Don't Say Gay law. State officials in Texas equated gender-affirming healthcare with child abuse and have ordered state agencies to investigate families and trans children. Violence against transgender people in the United States, particularly transgender women of color, remains a serious concern. Violence is exacerbated by structural discrimination against transgender people, including barriers to accessing employment, housing, and healthcare. Whereas the Cuban government treats trans rights and sex reassignment surgeries as health issues. Since 2008, Cuba's Minister of Public Health signed Resolution 126, an act that assured complete coverage for Cubans seeking sexual reassignment surgeries, the first of any country in Latin America to do so. And now Cuba is celebrated as having one of the most open and inclusive LGBTQ public health and education programs in the Americas. Cuba has provided an example of how the right to health for all moves towards breaking down the barriers of stigma by improving health outcomes for those with transsexual health needs. During my visit to Cuba, I also had the opportunity to talk with some women from the Afro Diverse Project. This is an Afro-LGBTQ initiative whose purpose is to empower and make visible Afro-LGBTQ people by means of a collaborative and participatory anti-racist and Afro-feminist approach from three fundamental premises: art, health, and community. Among the many topics we discussed was how the recent changes in Families Code law, which added protection of LGBTQ rights, has affected their lives and their community. Some of the benefits they mentioned are translated here to English and include egalitarian marriage, which protects us in conserving the assets that a couple has built up over time and gives us the assurance of mutual economic support. Legal support to create a family without any limitation. We can adopt and or have a pregnancy by assisted reproduction or artificial insemination. And in general, we have some protection that leads to everybody respecting us because now they know that there is a requirement that this respect must exist. So I'd also like to put in a brief plug for the U.S. Women in Cuba collaboration and the Lesbian and Allies Project. Maybe somebody could put in the chat for me, lesbians and allies @gmail.com. We're currently trying to recruit more women to join our cause. And if you reach out to us, we'll let you know how you can get involved. And the Women in the U.S. Women in Cuba collaboration website is womenandcuba.org. So in closing, first of all, I want to thank all of the women who shared their stories with me. The friends that I met and talked to about the blockade and the Families Code showed gracious hospitality, amazing creativity, innovation, and resiliency. And they are truly forward-thinking and committed to independence, social justice, and peace. And as Osmayda said, they are moving forward in self-determination despite this blockade. Please join our movement to fight to end the U.S. blockade and the travel ban and take Cuba off the list of state-sponsored terrorists. Abajo bloqueo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deb, for being with us this morning. Abajo el bloqueo, that is the message of the day. I would now like to invite up our next speaker this morning, who's speaking live here from New York City, Yamila Valle. She is a writer, abortion acompañante, and member of the NYC for Abortion Rights Organization. Let's give a warm welcome to Yamila Valle.
Yeah, take your time.
Oh, sorry. That's okay. Zoom has taken over our lives.
Thank you. As was mentioned, I'm a member of New York City for Abortion Rights here in the city, and I was asked to speak a little bit about the group and what we do. And I also want to, at the end, come back on what Deb was talking about in terms of the stark differences between the reproductive rights and sexual freedom, bodily autonomy landscape in the US compared to what is going on in Cuba. So New York City for Abortion Rights is an abolitionist, socialist, feminist collective that believes that New York City needs a grassroots movement to fight for full abortion, reproductive justice, and bodily autonomy that is independent from large NGOs like Planned Parenthood that have their own lobbying wings that rely on big donors that have to toe certain political lines, which was exemplified by their frankly horrible statement on the genocide in Gaza, and have also demobilized people around abortion and have been tepid around actually being unapologetically for abortion as a fundamental human right. Our work encompasses several different areas. We monitor the rise of anti-abortion groups in the US, including invasions of abortion clinics. And we see the rise of the anti-abortion right as part of the emboldenment of the far right in this country and the rise of certain fascistic elements of society. We also share a lot of information through events, through literature that we put out about self-managed abortion through medication, so through pills, which have become a really important tool of getting around states with bans, because it means that people can be mailed pills and they can have their abortions at home despite abortion being illegal in that state. And a study recently came out showing that more than half of all abortions in the US are done through pills. We also host educational events such as talks and workshops around all sorts of topics, including the US history of the anti-abortion rights, fights in different parts of the world like Argentina and Poland, the climate crisis, the rise of fake abortion clinics. And then lastly, perhaps the area where we focus the most on is directly countering these anti-abortion groups in New York. In particular, we participate in a lot of what is called clinic defense, which is essentially defending an abortion clinic from organized groups who are usually religious, but not always, that are there to harass patients going into clinics, who spread medical disinformation, who impersonate clinic workers to try to trick people into talking to them, who pray in front of the clinic, spray holy water on people, basically anything you can think of, hold really graphic, anatomically incorrect signs. They also invade clinics, and we basically try to make the space as welcoming as possible for patients while all of this is going on. We stand in front of them with rainbow umbrellas so that they're blocked and patients don't have to see them. We sing pop songs to drown out their praying. We, escort patients from the subway to the clinic. We warn them if we know that someone is impersonating a clinic worker when they're actually trying to coerce them into not going in for their appointments. And we have been involved in a long-term campaign against a Catholic anti-abortion group called Witness for Life that is based out of Old St. Patrick's Cathedral in Soho, actually not too far from here, that goes every month to the Planned Parenthood on Bleecker Street and Mott to harass people. In general, you could just say that our work broadly focuses on destigmatizing and fighting for abortion and bodily autonomy through collective education and building community power against those who are trying to prevent us from accessing healthcare with dignity. As people, thank you. As people probably know, we lost our constitutional right to abortion in the United States in June of 2022, which left laws around abortion up to individual states to legislate. And currently, about half of all states have either outright bans on abortion or severely restrict the procedure. And there are, related laws that are being passed all the time. And I want to talk about one particular statute in the state of Missouri, which was one of the first states to ban abortion after Roe v. Wade was overturned, that has gotten some media attention lately. And the law basically forces anyone who petitions for divorce to disclose whether or not they are pregnant. And in practice, what this means is that anyone who is pregnant when they petition for divorce is not allowed to get that divorce, even in cases of domestic abuse. There was an article in The Guardian recently about this, and it told the story of a pregnant woman with an abusive husband who tried to file for divorce before, having the baby, was denied that divorce, and had to spend the night before she gave birth sleeping in what she considered to be the safest part of the house, which was the basement, and she slept on the tile floor with her dogs. And I bring this example because I think this encapsulates some of the important things that are happening on a broad ideological and material level in the United States around this question, which is that cis heterosexual men are considered entitled to women and children solely through biological relation, no matter what, meaning that children are seen as property and therefore parents are seen as their owners, regardless of any meaningful sense of caregiving or parental responsibility or affective ties. I would argue that we can also see this in the hundreds of anti-trans and anti-queer bills. As Deb mentioned, the Don't Say Gay bills in schools, the attacks on quote unquote critical race theory, or talking about racism in schools. And all of these things together, including abortion bans, I think come down to the question of what are children for? Are children their own people? And is the job of parents to support and protect them as they find their own paths? Or are children the extensions, the appendages of parents? And do parents have the right to exert control over them and ultimately exploit and benefit from them? When children are seen as property, when as a society believe we are entitled to whatever we want from children, the same is also true for the people who give birth to children. And I just want to close out by bringing this back to the Cuban Family Code, which I'm sure we'll talk about and hear about more. It makes perfect sense to me that the Cuban Code included provisions on equal marriage, on all people's right to adopt, on gender and intra-family violence, on disabled people and elderly people, on the protection of family and affective ties that are not based on blood relation, but rather as the recognition of people who are caregivers, the autonomy of children, and parental responsibility over legal custody. This is a landmark, historic, unbelievable achievement of the feminist and queer struggles in Cuba. And also of the development of the revolutionary process. It is truly such an inspiration for people here and everywhere, especially when some of us feel that in our own places where we live, it's so far away from something similar happening. So thank you all for your work and inspiration.
Hello again, everyone. I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is joining us from South Africa. Her name is Precious Banda. Precious is a activist, a social justice and women's rights activist in South Africa. She is a new comrade of ours. Precious was elected as the chairperson for the Student Representation Council in 2012 and 2014. She studied with a bachelor's degree in accounting sciences in South Africa. She has served as a national committee member of the Young Communist League of South Africa. She also is part of the political commission in one of the terms where she was a lifelong national committee member. She has served as a national youth task member as well. Please welcome Precious Banda.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A colleague and a comrade of ours is getting married, so I have been in wedding festivities since morning. It's almost 7:30 here in the evening at night. So when it was time for the webinar, I had to look for a more quieter place where we are not dancing and drumming so that I can form part of the webinar. Also, as a contribution of our solidarity, my comrades who are dancing in the wedding and singing send their regards and their solidarity to the people of Cuba and to everyone who's joining us in this webinar. My name is Precious Banda. As introduced, I am from South Africa, but more importantly for this platform, I am the Continental Convener of the Young Women of Africa, which is a cognitive movement of young women from across Africa and the diaspora, founded by those who are from liberation movements on the continent that fought for the liberation of African people against oppression. And most of our liberation movements and parties have got a long history with Cuba and how Cuba offered support in practice, practical support in arms and also on the battlefield as they struggled for democracy. So we end up having, including other progressive parties that have not been part of the liberation movement and NGOs joining the broader movement called the Young Women of Africa. They have sent me to come and give a message of support, a message of solidarity. They have sent me to come and tell the people of Cuba to say victory is certain on behalf of millions of young women in the continent of Africa, from our hills and the valleys, from the dusty streets that we have of the toiling masses of our people, from the young professional who continues to dream and think they are going to make their continent better. All of them are united in sending support to the people of Cuba against the economic sanctions sanctioned by the aggressive, actually, apartheid America. We in South Africa have survived apartheid by minority rule here, and we understand what solidarity means. We understand what it means to win because the people of the world and the progressives of the world have stood side by side with you until victory. And it is for that reason that we know that even for the people of Cuba, victory is going to be certain. Victory is certain, and they shall triumph and they shall conquer. We send our special support and solidarity to the women, the children, the disabled. We send all of them, the minorities within Cuba, we send our special support to them. We identify with them because we understand from where we come from in the continent, that while we keep struggling for women to be empowered, while we keep struggling against human trafficking, while we keep struggling for women to be educated, while we keep struggling for women to be at the center of decision making, we still remember the people of Cuba for the good things they've done for our continent. And we know that once Cuba survives and the sanctions are taken out, we are all going to be fine. That victory for Cuba is the victory for the working class people of the world, is a victory for all peace-loving people. And we know that the Cuba that has been there for us, even when they are having difficulties of their own, will continue to stand with us. So in fact, a call against the sanctions against Cuba is a call for our own call, which we personalize as progressives in Africa. We stand with them also and thank them, and take this opportunity to thank them for the solidarity which they still offer in other countries. We thank them for the education that they still offer to African countries, where they still train our people. They are still teaching them discipline. Cuban trained doctors down here in the continent are the most disciplined. They are more selfless. They are revolutionaries. They are not only empowered with a skill, they are also empowered with humanity and the spirit of service, which is above the rest and is of high standard. So we value Cuba, and we place Cuba on a pedestal where we believe that if they can be fine, Africa and the world is going to be fine. Our message is not long. Our comrades are there in New York, attending the CSW, pushing for the issues of women, pushing against human trafficking, pushing for gender equality, pushing to ensure that women have access to jobs, to education, women have access to information, and also the abolishing of certain cultures that continue to degenerate women and to degrade them as subhumans. Our comrades that are there have been very vibrant in the parallel sessions that outside and also inside the main sessions to speak about the plight of the women of Africa. Our comrades are going to join you today in the evening from civil society, whom we work with. They're going to be joining you here. The women that put their bodies on the line, the women that help and assist victims of gender-based violence, who survive rape and sometimes even attacks from men. These women who stand up daily to save the lives of other women are there in New York and are going to be joining you in the evening to still deliver our messages of support and to say the struggles of the people of Cuba are also our struggles in South Africa. They are our struggles in the broader continent of Africa. They are the struggles of the women of Africa. And lastly, let me take this opportunity to congratulate the organizers of this important session. We are humbled and grateful to be part, to be given an opportunity to show our gratitude to the people of Cuba, to be given an opportunity to just say we will never forget Cuba and will continue to stand for Cuba until we attain victory. Thank you so much. Continue to create platforms of this nature. Continue also to give yourselves in the manner that you have done for putting together a series of these activities that show our support, our love for the people of Cuba. Thank you very much, and we love you all. We say here Amandla, which means all power to the people, solidarity forever. In Tanzania, we say asante sana. In Zambia, we say zikomo. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Sister Precious Banda joining us from South Africa. A real honor to have your voice shared with us here today. We are going to invite up now our last speaker for this session, Dr. Yamila Gonzalez Ferrer. Dr. Yamila Gonzalez Ferrer is the Vice President of the Cuban National Union of Jurists. She's also a part of the National Committee of the Cuban Federation of Women, as well as on the Supervisory Committee of the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. So please join us in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Yamila Gonzalez Ferrer.
Bueno, buenas tardes ya y muchísimas gracias una vez más por esta oportunidad.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
De verdad que cuando uno está en estos espacios y siente tan de cerca la solidaridad, el amor que tienen por nuestro pueblo, es realmente muy emocionante y siempre estamos muy agradecidos.
It's very exciting and it's hard to express, but to be in spaces like this, full of love and passion, to be close to you folks in the solidarity space and in the tradition of solidarity.
Y estoy segura que esta solidaridad es la que va a permitir más temprano que tarde acabar con el bloqueo.
And I'm very secure now more than ever that this solidarity today or tomorrow will secure our victory against this blockade.
Bueno, yo quería en mi intervención un poco actualizarles de la situación o del trabajo que estamos realizando para el fortalecimiento del marco jurídico cubano.
So in my intervention, I wanted to actualize the points of our judicial system in Cuba.
El año pasado, cuando estuve acá también con ustedes, les hablé de las transformaciones legislativas de nuestro Código de las Familias, de lo que habíamos hecho también en materia penal, en materia de leyes procesales.
So last year, I remember I was talking about our legislative process when it came towards talking about the family codes, talking about more women's rights and maternity.
Y todas estas transformaciones legislativas, sin duda, ponen en evidencia la voluntad política, la voluntad institucional de romper todas las barreras, de todos los obstáculos que en materia de prejuicios, de estereotipos todavía existen en el país.
So this legislative transformation, it really demonstrates the popular expression of the Cuban women, regardless of the obstacles and the stereotypes that still exist within Cuban society.
Y que desde la fuerza que tiene el ser parte ya del marco jurídico sirva, por supuesto, para su implementación.
And regardless of the force, this legislation is putting forth and is being implemented.
Y también, por supuesto, para fortalecer el papel del derecho, como también del papel educativo del derecho.
Yes, and this brings forth the proposal and the rights, just like the rights towards education.
Por lo tanto, este año y medio de implementación del Código de las Familias ha sido un año de muchos desafíos en materia de capacitación.
This year, which is like a year and a half towards the family codes, we're demonstrating us implementing this practice, this law practice.
Porque aunque fue un código precedido de un amplio proceso de consulta popular y de referendo, no es lo mismo estar ante la posibilidad del código que cuando ya tenemos el código y todas esas normas jurídicas, es decir, todo ese articulado que es bien profundo y con un contenido muy intenso, por decirlo de alguna manera, bueno, puede ser aplicable.
So, well, with this code, which was a code that was discussed and consulted and won by in our judicial system, we still have a lot of challenges that we face in wanting to implement this family code.
Eso ha traído como consecuencia que desde las instituciones jurídicas y desde también nuestra organización, la Unión Nacional de Juristas de Cuba, estemos implementando un proceso complejo, pero muy amplio, de capacitación a jueces, fiscales, abogados, notarios.
So yeah, this code has a lot of complexities within our judicial system when it comes to like enforcing it with judges, with fiscal attorneys, also lawyers.
También hemos estado evaluando esta implementación y los aspectos que pueden ser perfeccionados.
We've been evaluating the best way we could perfectly implement these laws.
Ahora mismo, recientemente, la Asamblea Nacional del Poder Popular aprobó a propuesta del Tribunal Supremo una evaluación de la Ley de Procesos Penales porque en este año de implementación, pues, nos hemos dado cuenta de que hay cuestiones que deben, pues, perfeccionarse y precisarse más, por decirlo de alguna manera.
So with conversations with the popular assembly of the people, a lot of these conversations are obstacles when it comes to the code. We've brought up more questions in ways we can advance these laws.
Las instituciones, por ejemplo, el Ministerio de Justicia, el Tribunal, la Fiscalía, han elaborado instrucciones que precisan para el actuar o sea, de nuestros jueces, fiscales y abogados.
So we've figured out ways within our judicial system of how to best implement these laws when it comes and reflective of our judges and lawyers.
Y también hemos estado trabajando desde la Unión Nacional de Juristas de Cuba y desde la Federación en esas alianzas que desde la sociedad civil tenemos en la sensibilización y cultura jurídica de la población y en particular de las mujeres.
So we've been working alongside with the Federation in finding ways to cultivate these laws in order to better further the women's rights when it comes to just stopping at the judicial system and figuring out ways to cultivate this.
La Asamblea Nacional del Poder Popular también en el mes de diciembre llevó la evaluación de la implementación del código a discusión entre todos los diputados y diputadas.
So the Popular People's Assembly back in December had a discussion about this where it was brought forth towards the deputy minister.
Y aunque en sentido general la evaluación es positiva de la implementación, pero quedaron claros cuáles son los desafíos y las responsabilidades de cada institución para hacerla todavía más efectiva.
So yeah, a lot of these conclusions have come towards the better ways of how to develop this in all the institutions.
Otro tema que me gustaría abordar vinculado al código, pero en sentido general a toda la protección de los derechos de las mujeres, es la implementación de la estrategia integral para la prevención y atención de la violencia de género y la que ocurre en el escenario familiar.
So one expression of this code, of this family code, reflective in women's rights is talking about the violence of gender, regardless of how one identifies themselves.
Ustedes saben que este tema del enfrentamiento a la violencia de género es uno de los que más manipulación mediática tiene en contra de nuestro país.
So this gender violence is one strategy or tactic that could be manipulated against our country.
Como si el Estado cubano tuviera impunidad para el análisis y la sanción de estos hechos.
As like they put saying how the Cuban state has impunity over these laws.
Y aunque definitivamente son muchos los desafíos que tenemos todavía, de ninguna manera esto es real.
And regardless of like our achievements, we still have a lot of challenges, which are realities.
Partiendo de que tenemos un marco jurídico muy fuerte contra la violencia, que comienza por su expresión en varios artículos en el texto constitucional.
We still have these challenges that are seen in the articles of our Constitution.
Que se ha incorporado a leyes especiales como el Código de las Familias, como el Código Penal con más de 30 artículos que incorporan la mirada hacia la violencia de género y familiar con sanciones de las más severas.
So as we see with the Families Code or with the Penal Code, a lot of this is within our Constitution. There's over 30 articles which reflects these laws.
Y ahora estamos en todo un proceso de elaboración y de implementación de los protocolos de actuación institucionales.
And we're in the process of finding ways to better implement these protocols within our institutions.
Y aquí el papel de la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas y su equipo de expertas en materia de violencia ha sido muy importante porque las instituciones, dígase la Fiscalía, los tribunales, la policía han enviado a la federación sus protocolos para que el grupo de expertas pueda evaluarlo.
So we've come up with protocols in order to evaluate the best way of decreasing the violence against women, whether that has to do with the judges, attorneys, also having one-on-ones with our police system.
Y bueno, recientemente se aprobó el protocolo de actuación del Ministerio de Trabajo para el enfrentamiento a la discriminación y el acoso en el ámbito laboral.
So yeah, a lot of these laws have been approved in our institution as laws that is against the discrimination and harassment.
De eso no voy a hablar porque van a hablar mis compañeras en el segundo panel.
I am not going to talk about that because my my sisters are gonna talk about this in the second panel.
Y ahora un reto importante que tenemos en la implementación de estos protocolos es a nivel local, es decir, llevarlo al municipio, a la base donde ocurren los hechos, donde necesitamos fortalecer las redes de apoyo y que se conozca toda esta legislación protectora.
And one challenge that we face is knowing how to spread this piece of legislation towards the locality, towards the municipalities, so it becomes more popular in the society.
Una cosa importante es todo lo que se está haciendo desde el punto de vista estadístico.
One important thing is looking at it from the lens, the optics of the state.
El pasado,
Statistics,
el pasado año se creó y bueno, está en pleno funcionamiento el Observatorio de Género.
To observe the gender.
En este,
observational gender.
en este observatorio aparecen estadísticas y datos importantes en muchos eslabones, no solo lo vinculado a la violencia.
So in a lot of these statistics, it shows the statistics of gender, not just in violence.
Y está incorporada las estadísticas vinculadas a la violencia, pero como todo observatorio de género, aparecen los datos de los hechos que ya están sancionados por el tribunal.
So there's a lot of the statistics that show the gender violence demonstrate certain sanction or certain parts that have been sanctioned by the tribunal.
Y uno de los desafíos que tenemos es el de tener esa información en tiempo real, es decir, cuando ocurre el hecho, y ya la Fiscalía General de la República está trabajando en la creación de un registro interoperable para dar esta información en tiempo real.
So the problem is that a lot of these statistics is very hard to like really document them in real time, and we're trying to solve this with our general attorney to figure out the best way to document these gender violence statistics in like quick and real time.
Por lo tanto, cuando en todas esas redes sociales, en fin, que dicen Cuba no tiene ley integral de violencia y por lo tanto hay impunidad, es falso.
Yeah, so when they wanted to say propaganda on social media about how Cuba is not taking care of this problem or this impunity, it is false.
La propia iniciativa de tener una ley integral está incorporada a la estrategia en el ámbito legislativo y sencillamente estamos evaluando toda la implementación de lo que tenemos hoy para llegado el momento, entonces tener una norma superior.
So it's very important for us to have this integral law to take initiative in order to demonstrate how we're progressing in our in this challenge.
Entonces, dicho esto, quiero comentarles dos cuestiones fundamentales. Una es la aprobación de nuestra Ley de Salud Pública en diciembre de 2023.
So one ways or two questions is basically demonstrate our health plan that we had back in December of 2023.
Ley que responde al mandato constitucional, que está conectada con nuestro Código de la Familia, sobre todo los aspectos que el Código de la Familia trata en este ámbito, y con otras normas jurídicas.
A law that's constitutional and connected to our family code, that is reflective of our judicial system.
Es una ley que también fue fruto de un amplio proceso de consultas especializadas en el país,
It's a law that is connected to the fruits of a conversation we have had nationally in our country.
todas las sociedades científicas de medicina opinaron y hicieron propuestas sobre la ley.
All the scientific sectors of our country have had conversations about this law.
Nuestras sociedades científicas de la Unión Nacional de Juristas de Cuba también contribuyeron.
All the judicial parts of our Cuban judicial law also contributed.
Por lo tanto, también decimos que es una construcción desde lo popular, desde lo especializado dentro de las instituciones y dentro de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil de nuestro país.
We would say that this law is a reflection of the popular conversation within our institution of our country.
Esta ley ratifica el derecho de la salud pública como un derecho del pueblo.
This law ratifies healthcare as a right of the people.
Desarrolla derechos y garantías constitucionales y deberes de las personas en el ámbito de la salud.
This development is an important development in the area of healthcare.
Introduce el tema de la ética y los valores como parte de la formación y del ejercicio de la profesión, que ustedes saben que es algo que en la práctica ocurre, pero que no estaba reflejado en la ley.
This introduction of ethics is a very important introduction, which is very reflective in our law.
Incorpora la visión de los servicios integrales desde la prevención, la atención, la protección y la recuperación.
This integrated law, it reflects of prevention, integration, and ways of intervening.
Actualiza todas las responsabilidades que el Estado tiene, el Estado y el gobierno, para garantizar el funcionamiento de los servicios de salud pública en el país, gratuitos y de calidad.
This law actualizes the responsibility of the government in ensuring healthcare to the total parts of the society.
Tema que está severamente afectado por el impacto del bloqueo en nuestro país.
And this is a subject that is reflected and impacted by the blockade, which our country is subdued to.
Que ha puesto muchas veces en crisis la calidad de los servicios, la distribución de los medicamentos.
That has put in crisis the quality of our healthcare system when it comes to serving our people and also in our medicines.
Pero en medio de todo eso, como Osmayda decía, la mayor cantidad del presupuesto del Estado está a disposición de los servicios de salud y de educación en nuestro país.
Between all of that, most of the economic wins is always invested in our healthcare system.
Siguiendo a la compañera que me antecedió, me gustaría, para terminar esta parte de la ley de salud, hablar un poquito del tema de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos.
So as just as the person who came before me that spoke about the healthcare rights, I also wanted to talk about the sexual or gender rights.
Como ustedes conocen, el artículo 43 de nuestra Constitución por primera vez se refiere a los derechos sexuales y reproductivos y su protección. Por lo tanto, es una prioridad del Estado.
So in Article 43, it talks about reproductive rights and sexual rights.
El artículo 4 de nuestro Código de las Familias ya también había incorporado como un derecho de las personas en el ámbito familiar el respeto a los derechos sexuales y reproductivos.
So in Article 4, our family code, it respects the rights to reproduction and the sexual rights in the family.
Y el respeto a que las parejas decidieran cómo, cuándo, en qué momento quieren tener su descendencia y si quieren tenerla.
And also the ways how like couples when and how they want to have their family or their descendants.
Y sobre todo el respeto a la que las mujeres decidan sobre su propio cuerpo.
And to for women to have autonomy over their own bodies.
Entonces, en la ley de salud se incorpora una sección específica dentro de la atención médico-social a los derechos sexuales y reproductivos con un enfoque de género, con un enfoque multidisciplinario y de curso de vida.
In these laws incorporate the importance of reproductive rights and rights to sexuality,
donde se expresan cómo se organizan y se sustentan estos servicios,
express how these services are given,
todo lo relacionado con la seguridad en la atención, con la universalidad en esta atención,
representing the security and the universality of this attention, this law,
sin discriminación de ningún tipo, es decir, que incorpora toda esa mirada de respeto a la diversidad.
and without any discrimination to gender diversity.
Se incorpora el aseguramiento a todas las personas del acceso a los servicios de salud reproductiva, planificación familiar y regulación de la fecundidad en las instituciones certificadas para ello.
Pero repita eso una vez más.
Que la ley incorpore el aseguramiento a todas las personas al acceso a los servicios de salud reproductiva, planificación familiar y regulación de la fecundidad.
So this law gives access to those that are entitled to reproductive rights, family rights.
Este es otro tema que incluso desde las discusiones del proyecto de Código de la Familia salió como una preocupación en el sentido de que estos servicios que los hemos incorporado como derechos, la manera de garantizarlos requieren de una gran presupuesto, es decir, de condiciones económicas que en realidad nuestro país no tiene.
So this law demonstrates how these rights have been put forth regardless of the economic problems our country faces.
Y que también eso es consecuencia y un efecto del bloqueo
And a
hacia
lot of
nuestro país.
this is a consequence of the blockade against our country that's put onto our country.
Hoy en día es complicado hasta adquirir condones en el mercado,
Today, repita eso una vez más, perdón.
que en estos momentos, dado las condiciones económicas en que tenemos y los problemas de financiamiento y de adquisición de cuestiones médicas, tenemos dificultades hasta para obtener condones
Okay. And so because
y otros métodos anticonceptivos.
of this economic problems, we have problems of gaining stuff that could support. Oh, yes, thank you. Because of these what she's trying to say is that due to this blockade, there's a lot of problems in us gaining materials. And one thing is like, for example, condoms.
Imagínense entonces lo que puede representar para Cuba aspirar a tener, por ejemplo, un banco de semen, a
Sí.
tener los equipamientos que se necesitan para garantizar la reproducción asistida de alta tecnología.
So yeah, this blockade really affects how their healthcare system in order to gain material stuff. Like it's very hard. Imagine it's very hard for them to have a sperm bank or also the materials needed in order to enforce their reproductive rights or assist in the reproductive rights.
Pero la voluntad política está en garantizar el derecho y en buscar todas las alternativas para poder dar estos servicios.
So the popular will of the people is to demonstrate the best manner how they're able to service like the best way they could service these rights regardless of the blockade.
Desde, por supuesto, la mirada de la diversidad. No solo estamos hablando de que a estos servicios puedan acceder las parejas heterosexuales, sino cualquier pareja homoafectiva e incluso para otras cuestiones como puede ser lo vinculado a la multiparentalidad que ya el Código de la Familia reconocía. En fin, todos estos entramados están reconocidos en estos servicios que se pretende ofertar y que ya están reconocidos.
So yeah, these rights are extended to regardless of folks that identify as homosexual, pardon my French, or of people who are LGBTQ, regardless of like their sexual identity or orientation. These rights are guaranteed to whoever.
Y la ley, por supuesto, reafirma y confirma este derecho de las personas a decidir si tener o no descendencia, el momento, las condiciones, en fin.
So this law demonstrates whether one wants to have a baby or not, a descendant or not.
Y en el artículo 136, apartado 2, ya expresa visiblemente algo que es un derecho en Cuba desde hace mucho tiempo, que es que las mujeres en ejercicio de sus derechos sexuales y reproductivos tienen el derecho a decidir sobre la terminación voluntaria del embarazo.
So in the Article 136, Cuban women have the right of whether to choose whether they want to give birth to a child or not.
En Cuba, como decía Osmayda, desde el año 36 fue autorizado el aborto, pero el aborto terapéutico.
So the way Myra said that how Cuba back in 1936 said that abortion was a right, but it was more of like a clinical right.
Pero desde el año 1965, la interrupción voluntaria del embarazo es un servicio de salud universal y gratuito para todas las mujeres.
So since 1965, abortion has been a universal rights for every woman in Cuba.
Lo que ha hecho la ley de salud es plasmar lo que ya era un derecho en la práctica.
Pero voy a repetir eso otra vez. Estaba
Lo
aplaudiendo.
que ha hecho la ley de salud es plasmar en la ley lo que ya era un derecho en la práctica.
So what the health law did was to put forward this law that was already put into practice.
Y confirma la voluntad política de que en un momento en el que en el mundo, como las compañeras decían, se retrocede en el ámbito de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, Cuba va a continuar avanzando en este sentido.
So regardless, like the way the sister said before, regardless of the challenges that Cuba might face with this law, Cuba will still move forward in the gains and advancements of the reproductive rights for women.
Y ya para terminar, porque supongo que ya se me ha ido el tiempo,
And also to finish, because I feel like time has passed. And
solamente quiero decir que recientemente también, el pasado año, aprobamos en el país la política para el establecimiento del Sistema Nacional para el Cuidado Integral de la Vida en Cuba.
so I wanted to say, since last year, we have been working on a project of integrating the important parts of life in Cuba.
Esto va a permitir, y de hecho hay una comisión en la que está la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas y varias instituciones y organizaciones de la sociedad civil y equipos también de las universidades, expertos en estos temas,
So this will permit us, women from the Federation, to have this conversation with our institutions and universities.
Esto nos va a permitir enfrentar los retos que tenemos en el país derivados del envejecimiento poblacional,
So this will help us confront the challenges that we have in our country when it comes to the aging,
del saldo migratorio externo que tiene el país,
to the immigration problem.
el efecto migratorio,
Okay, yeah, the migration problem.
el decrecimiento poblacional, sobre todo de la población en edad laboral.
To the increase of the labor population.
Nacen menos niños, las personas son más longevas, hay una alta tasa migratoria. Todo esto hace que la población en edad laboral haya disminuido.
So there's been a migration, and this data shows that it decreases the labor force. Am I translating that right?
So there's
Yeah.
been a lower birth rate in Cuba, people are living longer, and also migration. The three factors are impacting the labor force.
That is correct. Yes.
Este sistema también nos va a permitir perfeccionar la atención institucional a las personas en situación de discapacidad en nuestro país.
This law will help us push more in our institution those that have these challenges of these
Disabilities, or
Disabili-
differently abled people.
yeah, differently able people.
vulnerable populations.
Este sistema, de la manera que se está concibiendo, tiene una mirada desde los derechos, desde el curso de vida,
So this, oh, actually, you take that.
Okay.
My
He's-
brain is.
He's been translating for a long time. Gracias, Yamil.
decía que este sistema tiene como cuatro, vamos a decir, estructuras fundamentales, el enfoque o enfoques fundamentales, el enfoque de derechos,
So we've got kind of four main focuses for this institution.
el enfoque de género,
So gender,
y que es muy importante porque además, como sabemos, la labor de cuidados recae principalmente en las mujeres.
because we know that a lot of the work that is being done is being put on the shoulders of women,
Con consecuencias para ellas porque son las que dejan de trabajar para las labores de cuidado,
because they're the ones who are leaving the workforce in order to take care of the home
entre otras cosas.
and many other things.
Tiene un enfoque también interseccional,
We also have an intersectional approach
porque se han hecho estudios muy interesantes que están aportando a este sistema de lo que pasa, por ejemplo, en determinadas zonas de nuestro país o cuál es la diferencia entre las personas en dependencia de su color de la piel o de su situación de discapacidad.
because we're seeing that there are a lot of different effects where people live in the country, the color of their skin, all of these things have outcomes on their participation.
Y el otro piloto que tiene es el de curso de vida.
And the third area is discurso de
Curso de vida.
length of life, or the
Es decir, una mirada especial a lo que ocurre, por ejemplo, con las poblaciones de niñas, niños y adolescentes, de personas de la mediana edad, de personas adultas mayores.
that an age-based approach, that whether people are young or teenagers or the elderly, they have different necessities.
Y esto, por supuesto, también contribuye a la valoración económica del trabajo doméstico y de cuidado que ya el Código de las Familias la había enfocado desde la perspectiva familiar.
And that again, people's participation in work and in the labor force is determined by this factor.
Entonces, bueno, nada, les agradezco, discúlpenme que me haya extendido, pero un poco quería
Thank you
ponerlos
so
en
much. I
contexto.
apologize. It's been a bit longer than expected, but I think this is important. Muchas gracias, Doctora Yamila Gonzalez Ferrer. Thank you so much to the Dr. Yamila Gonzalez Ferrer. We wanted to invite Yamila as well as Osmayda and Camila if they'd like to come to the front. We're short on time for discussion, but we're hoping to have 10 to 15 minutes for a short Q&A before we break for lunch. Yeah, you need to tell people how to do it. Yeah. The button and stuff. But,
Precious is also on the, I need a mic or the Q&A. Hello, everyone. If you would like to ask a question, there is a button on your microphone that will allow you to speak. Please use your microphones to speak. There is a button that will allow you to ask any questions that you may have to the panel.
I can help folks too.
Right. And Allison will come around if you need assistance. Thanks again to our speakers for a great morning and afternoon.
Okay, folks, we're ready. If folks would like to ask some questions, T will facilitate.
The last speaker spoke about the difficulty of communicating and spreading provisions of the family code to various sections of Cuba. And I was just wondering if you could expand on that from the standpoint of what those difficulties are and what proposals are being set to try to make that more effective.
I think we'll probably take 2 or 3 questions first, and then we'll allow our speakers to respond because we've got tight on time.
Okay, Diane will be next.
Can you hear me? This question is for Dr. Yamila. Cuban healthcare is known and respected all over the world with a strong focus on prevention. The Families Code has clear condemnation of gender violence and consequences for breaking the law. We know that gender impacts not only the survivor, but psychologically and physically the entire family. My question is, does the focus on gender violence as a healthcare issue have the same emphasis on prevention? And what does that consist of now, or what plans are in place for implementation in the future?
I didn't know you had called on me, sorry. I was just wondering, Yamila, if I got it right, I was half listening in Spanish and not so good, and half listening to the translation, said that women, because of the embargo and the ensuing problems, have left the workforce at a greater rate than men. That's, of course, what happened in this country too, during the pandemic. I'm interested, what steps are being taken to try to reverse that, given the enormous complications imposed by the embargo? I assume you're talking about the long lines. All of those things affect women more. So what steps are or can be taken?
Thank you so much for those 3 questions. We'll pause to let our speakers answer, and then we'll try and come back again. We're very tight on time for discussion.
Sí, bueno, con respecto a la pregunta sobre las dificultades en la implementación del código,
So for the discussion on the difficulties of implementing the code,
yo las veo en 2 líneas fundamentales.
I see 2 fundamental issues.
Y así, es decir, y como expliqué también en la Asamblea Nacional del Poder Popular, se analizó profundamente estas dificultades en la implementación.
And our National Assembly has spent a lot of time analyzing the difficulties of implementing this code.
Una está vinculada a las cuestiones técnicas.
One is about technical questions.
Porque el código crea nuevas instituciones, transformó la manera de proceder en algunas de las que ya existían.
Because the code has created new institutions, it's changing the way that we implement some laws.
Y por supuesto que eso requiere de una capacitación profunda a nuestros profesionales del derecho para que se fortalezcan técnicamente.
So it requires a lot of new forms of education so that people get used to this new organization and these new institutions.
Y eso se ha estado resolviendo a lo largo de todo este año y medio.
And this is, of course, going to take time, and it's something we've been working on over the last 1.5 years.
Con las capacitaciones que se han realizado.
With the different courses and education that we've been implementing.
Con indicaciones precisas de las direcciones nacionales de las instituciones jurídicas.
What we've been doing with, for example, the National Jurists Association.
Otra cuestión está vinculada a la pervivencia de estereotipos y prejuicios sexistas.
So then, aside from the technical implementation of the code, we have the need to challenge in society the stereotypes and prejudices that people have.
Y que están instalados en la subjetividad de los profesionales.
And that this is not only in the population, but is part of the subjectivity of professionals as well and educators.
Por ponerle algunos ejemplos,
To give you some example.
el código establece la guardia y cuidado compartida.
So the law gives equal sharing of custody.
Si nosotros no tenemos unos profesionales del derecho que valoren, por ejemplo, el papel de los padres, de los hombres en la educación, en el cuidado de los hijos, puede ser que haya algunas guardas y cuidados compartidos que no se aprueben.
So if, lawyers, judges, and other legal specialists don't understand the importance of shared custody between men and women, and specifically the rights of the father, then they might not be granting equal custody.
Si nosotros no tenemos profesionales del derecho sensibles a los temas vinculados a la violencia de género, por ejemplo,
If we don't have lawyers and specialists who are well educated and well versed in gender-based violence, for example,
estaríamos en problemas vinculados a esa misma utilización de la guardia y cuidado compartida cuando una de sus prohibiciones es que cuando exista situaciones de violencia.
then they won't also understand that there need to be exceptions to shared custody, for example, in cases of gender-based violence.
Y por eso los procesos de capacitación desde la mirada multidisciplinaria en materia de género los hemos intensificado, porque no es que no los tuviéramos antes, lo que ahora ya con esta mirada del código tenemos que fortalecerlo.
So that's why professional education of these different professions has been stepped up after the passing of the code. And that's not to say that this professional education didn't exist before. It's always existed, but it's something that we've had to intensify since passing the new families code.
Nosotros tenemos figuras, por ejemplo, de protección hacia las mujeres, como es la de la compensación económica, precisamente para las mujeres que han dedicado su vida al trabajo de cuidado y doméstico.
So another issue, for example, is compensation of women who have spent time working in the home rather than in the labor force, making sure that women who are staying at home are compensated for that work.
Y que ante situaciones de separaciones y divorcios se pueden ver afectadas.
And so in cases of separation or divorce, these women can be economically affected, and we have to counterbalance that.
Miren, otro elemento importante e interesante también es que la Ley de Procesos Penales incorporó la figura de la víctima como parte del proceso penal.
¿Puedes repetir?
Que la Ley de Procesos Penales incorporó a la víctima de los delitos como un sujeto activo, es decir, como parte del proceso penal, no como testigo o como solo víctima.
So that also the victims of crimes and their perspective on the outcomes also is now taken into account.
La manera en que se representa a una víctima no es la misma en que se representa a un agresor.
And that the way that a victim needs to be represented and advocated for isn't the same as the way that an aggressor needs to be advocated for.
La Organización Nacional de Bufetes Colectivos, que es la organización en la que se agrupan nuestros abogados litigantes, han tenido que realizar procesos de capacitación específicos dirigidos a la representación de las víctimas.
And so the National Lawyers Association in Cuba is specifically talking about right now how to better support victims and talking more about victims' rights.
Entonces, por eso decía que todos los procesos de implementación legislativa tienen desafíos.
And so for every law that is passed, there are new challenges.
Y por supuesto también, como decía aquí Osmayda, el tema de la cultura jurídica, para que las personas también sepan ejercer sus derechos, puedan demandar.
And so that also people need to understand that lawyers and other professionals need to have a change in their culture and their way of thinking about the law, and that this is part of the responsibility of implementing the Families Code.
Por eso, para nosotros el tema de la evaluación sistemática de la implementación es vital.
And so this is why evaluating how the implementation is going forward of the Families Code is so important.
También da respuesta incluso a la segunda pregunta. Sí, en parte. En el tema de la violencia de género,
In terms of, and so that answer included some answers to both questions, but in terms of gender-based violence,
sí la estamos viendo como una cuestión de salud y una parte, o sea, lo podemos demostrar porque se ha incorporado en la ley de salud pública también.
Gender-based violence, we are seeing as a health issue, as a public health issue, and it is included in our public health laws.
Y ahí un elemento importante en la prevención y también en la protección es el protocolo de actuación que ha aprobado el Ministerio de Salud Pública ante casos de violencia de género y familiar.
So, and within that, we see both the importance of prevention and of protection when we're talking about gender-based violence, and this has been a part of our protocols now in the Ministry of Public Health.
Y si tenemos en cuenta que en nuestro país la salud primaria, es decir, el sistema de atención de salud está montado en primerísimo lugar en la atención primaria de salud, que es la que ocurre en la comunidad, esto tiene mayor importancia.
And this is within, hopefully you all understand a little bit about Cuba's healthcare system and how it is organized very much on the front lines in communities. And so we're responding community by community to different needs.
Y con respecto a la otra pregunta de los datos, ¿no? Del abandono de las mujeres, de los puestos de
So the
trabajo.
question about, about the statistics around women and work.
Por supuesto, si las mujeres son las que principalmente se dedican a las actividades de cuidado dentro de la familia,
So if women are the main ones still, working in the home and doing the work required at the home, in the home.
en la medida que tenemos mayores dificultades en los servicios que se pueden ofertar, en las redes que se pueden crear para el cuidado, por ejemplo, de personas ancianas o de niños y niñas con determinadas enfermedades, eso obviamente pone a las mujeres.
This means that we need to take into wider consideration the work that women are doing in the home, not only for their family, but then also thinking about the childcare issues and then also thinking about the care of the elderly.
También bueno, por eso es tan importante la aprobación de esta política sobre el sistema de cuidados.
And that's why this new kind of laws and politics related to the care is so important.
Que al final tiene un sentido y una aspiración de que ese trabajo de cuidado pueda ser remunerado.
And so the idea and the hope and the plan is that eventually this work for caring for children and the elderly should be paid work.
Cuestión que lamentablemente por las condiciones económicas de nuestro país, derivadas en gran medida por el bloqueo, además de por la crisis mundial y todas las cosas, es imposible ahora mismo.
Which up until this point, unfortunately, because of the economic situation in Cuba, majorly because of the US blockade on Cuba, but also because of the international economic crisis and situation, just hasn't been possible yet.
Otra cosa que pasa es que debido también a toda esta crisis económica, el Estado, es decir, las instituciones no tienen la misma capacidad de pago a las personas que lo que pueden tener determinados sectores privados.
And this is a wider problem that impacts the whole system because the state sector, which is health, is not able to pay the same salaries as some private occupations. And so that is also another challenge that we're facing is compensating the state workers for the important work they're doing.
Por lo tanto, muchas personas no es que emigren al exterior.
But in any case, people are not just migrating outside.
Sino que emigran al trabajo no estatal.
They are migrating from state work to the private sector in order to make money.
Y eso pone en crisis a nuestras instituciones.
And this creates an crisis for our public institutions.
Porque además las personas se van al trabajo no estatal no para desarrollar su profesión, lo que estudió, ni mucho menos.
Because they're not working in their chosen profession, in the profession that they were educated for.
Entonces, bueno, de manera general.
And so in general, these are some challenges that we're facing. So those have answered kind of our main three questions. I know that there's quite a few of you who still have questions. We are gonna basically wrap up in about, I guess, 4 or 5 minutes. Maybe we can take 2 more questions, and then we're gonna have to go to our lunch break because we have an amazing second session coming up. We want you all to be back here and well fed for that. Yeah. Yes, we're gonna cut lunch down to 45 minutes. There are some good cafes close by where people can grab something and come back.
Also, you're welcome to come back and bring your food back into this room.
Okay.
So,
T is just letting people know that you can eat in this room, so please do consider grabbing something and bringing it back here to eat as well. Okay.
we'll take the next 2 questions and then we'll wrap up and get ready to go out for lunch.
Okay.
We'll take Jason and Barbara too.
Thank you for being here. Can you say something about the extent countrywide, across various municipalities in Cuba, the extent to which younger generations, younger women are becoming directly part of the Federation, and what are the requirements for becoming a member of the FMC?
Bueno, el primer
Please, no,
requisito.
vamos a ir al segundo pregunta y
ya.
después sí.
Okay, thank you for all the presentations. They were wonderful. Ask.
It's got to be red, Barbara. There we go. It's red now.
Okay. I wanted to ask Camila to describe a little bit more the situations at the abortion clinics that your organization is present at and defending the women at. How often do the right wingers, are they always there? In what numbers, and just a little bit more description about that. That'd be very interesting.
Okay. Voy a dar a Camila la primera y al segunda a Osmayda. I'm just gonna let Camila answer that question first because I feel like it's a heavier topic, and then we can wrap up with the Cubans on a more positive note.
Yeah, so Witness for Life, which is the main Catholic group that we oppose, goes to the Soho Planned Parenthood the first Saturday of every month, but they alternate locations. So on different weekends, they go to different parts. So they go to the Bronx, and there was an attempt a few years ago to expand into Brooklyn, which we actually were able to stop. They were being hosted from a different church, and we built a pressure campaign against the church basically hosting this group because that's where they congregated. And after Mass, they would just march to the Brooklyn Planned Parenthood. They are not the only group that targets the Soho Planned Parenthood. A lot of the anti-abortion groups in the city, but also in the country, kind of see that Planned Parenthood as like abortion headquarters, which is funny to people in the abortion movement because Planned Parenthood often does not provide most of the abortions that happened in New York. But other groups like evangelical groups and also non-religious groups come out a lot in the hundreds. They even bus people from out of state. And a lot of the people who attend these masses and do the harassment campaigns are not actually congregants of the church. They come into town during these Saturdays just for the sole purpose of going to this mass and then harassing patients. I have some more information here, which I can hand out later. And then we're having a big action next Saturday on March 23rd at Foley Square because there will be anti-abortion and anti-LGBTQ people attempting to rally and march. And so we're having, like a big rally to counter them. It's also important to note that NGOs like Planned Parenthood have kind of discouraged clinic defense because they see it as bringing, giving them unwanted attention, as being distracting. But we believe that not countering them is much worse, being able to just let them have their space to build and to get stronger and bigger. You know, it's been proven time and time again that if you ignore them, they're not going to go away.
Bueno, respecto a los requisitos para integrar la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas,
So just talking about how women are joining the Federation of Cuban Women.
en el caso específico de las jóvenes,
When we're talking about youth,
deben tener 14 años de edad.
they need to be 14 years old.
Y el único requisito es llegar a ser miembro de la federación de manera voluntaria, es decir, el principio de voluntariedad, querer ser miembro de la organización.
The only requirement beyond being 14 years old is that the only requirement to join the FMC is that it be voluntary, that people join because they want to join. They join of their own free will.
Desde que las niñas estudian en la escuela, hay varios programas, por ejemplo, de educación cívica, donde se les va informando de cuáles son las organizaciones de la sociedad civil cubana.
So from schools, we are educating young women about many different things that they can get involvement around civic education.
¿Cuál es la historia de estas organizaciones?
Around the history of these organizations.
Dígase la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas,
What
los
is
comités
the
de defensa de la revolución,
what is the role and importance of Cuban women in the
la
defense of the Cuban
Asociación
Revolution?
Nacional de Agricultores Pequeños, la Central de Trabajadores de Cuba.
Talking about the Central of Cuban Trade Workers, talking about the work of the agricultural workers sector.
¿Cuál ha sido la historia de estas organizaciones en la revolución?
Again,
¿Para
the
qué se
history and
crearon?
development of these institutions within the Cuban Revolution.
Y de igual forma en las comunidades.
And again, that this education is happening within the communities.
La estructura y la organización que tiene la Federación de Mujeres
The
Cubanas
structure of the Cuban Federation of Women
a nivel de la comunidad le permite
is structured at the community level, which allows us to
realizar intercambio, actividades en las que participan
have
las niñas, los niños, las
exchanges
familias.
with youth, with children, and bring them together on a community level.
De igual manera en los vínculos que mantiene la federación con las escuelas en las comunidades.
And this allows us to achieve the objectives of the Cuban Federation of Women in the community level.
Permite que las niñas y las adolescentes conozcan el porqué de la existencia de la federación y cuáles son sus objetivos.
And it allows young people in Cuba to understand why we have a Cuban Federation of Women and what its role is in Cuban society.
Cuando las adolescentes llegan a esta edad, que son los 14 años,
So when Cuban women arrive at the age of 14, that they're allowed to join the Federation,
se realiza un acto para la integración de ellas a la organización.
we have a special activity to invite them and commemorate their involvement in the organization, or their welcoming into the organization.
Es decir, se hace de manera formal su ingreso a la organización, fundamentalmente en sitios históricos de la comunidad.
And their integration into the FMC is a formal event and happens in specific locations in the communities that have a historic importance.
Y allí se les da a conocer cuáles son los derechos y los deberes que tienen una vez que son miembros de la Federación de Mujeres
And
Cubanas.
it's at this event that we speak about the rights and responsibilities that they have as members of the Cuban Federation of Women.
La mayoría de las cubanas, más de 4.300.000,
More than 4.3 million Cuban women have joined the Cuban Federation of Women.
integramos esta organización femenina. Y no tenemos edad para dejar de ser miembro de la
And
organización.
there's no age where you have to retire from the organization.
El único requisito es el principio de voluntariedad.
The only requirement is
lo
that
tanto-
voluntary joining, that you join of your own free will.
Así de heterogénea es la federación. Tenemos en ella mujeres jóvenes de 14 años, de 60 años, de 105 años.
And so we have a diversity of women in our organization. We have
Mujeres
14-year-olds,
blancas,
60-year-olds,
negras,
105-year-olds.
lesbianas,
We have women who are lesbians. We have women who are black, white,
profesionales, trabajadoras del hogar,
who are working in the home, who are homemakers, who are working
diferente orientación, ya lo decía,
many different
orientación
sectors.
sexual, creencias religiosas.
different religious beliefs.
Eso es lo que nos hace más fuertes.
That's what makes us stronger is
Que
diversity.
somos heterogéneas en nuestra composición.
It is the heterogeneousness of our
Y
organization.
con orgullo decimos siempre que donde esté una mujer cubana está la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas.
And so wherever Cuban women are, the Cuban Women's Federation is.
Thank you, muchísimas gracias. And we would like to take this moment to thank all of our prestigious speakers. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for extending your heart and soul to this work. We appreciate you and we give you the deepest gratitude and solidarity. Thank you to Deb and Precious for also sharing your wisdom with us this afternoon. We appreciate you and thank you for standing in solidarity with the Cuban people always.
Yes, we are keeping lunch short and sweet, 45 minutes. We want to be back here and starting at 3:15. There's lots of places to get a quick lunch. Feel free to bring back your food here to eat so we can get started on time. Our next session will be on the US labor movement and Cuba solidarity. It's going to be a great session and we look forward to you all coming back. Viva Cuba!